The plains stretched farther than any eye could follow, gold and dry beneath the sinking sun. Dust rose behind the cart as it jolted down the rocky path, wooden wheels rattling like bones. The wind was hot, quiet, too quiet for what was about to happen. 12-year-old Juniper Lee sat in the back of the cart, clutching a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. Her legs lay still across the wooden slats, unmoving, pale and thin beneath the hem of her patched dress. She hadn't felt them since the accident nearly a year ago, since the horse reared and she'd fallen wrong. They'd tried a few doctors, then a preacher, then nothing at all. Now came the part no one talked about. "Here's good," said a man's voice, sharp and tired. The cart stopped. Her uncle, her mother's brother, a man Juniper barely knew, hopped down, not meeting her eyes. "We can't carry you no more, June," he said. "Ain't your fault, but it's the way of things." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She could only watch as he pulled her gently from the cart and set her down beside an old stump near the base of a butte. The wilderness stretched around her like an ocean. He left a blanket, a canteen, a small loaf of bread, and nothing else. By the time she found her voice, the cart was already far down the road. "Uncle Tom?" But he didn't turn back. Night came fast in the desert. Cold replaced the heat. Coyotes howled in the distance, and every sound made Juniper press deeper into herself, heart pounding, breath shallow. Her fingers clutched the canteen like it was a weapon. She didn't cry. She'd cried everything out back at the ranch weeks ago when her aunt whispered that she was too much trouble now and would be better off in heaven. Now, Juniper sat in silence, waiting for heaven to come. But heaven didn't come. What came instead was a horse, the thunder of hooves at dawn. Slow, measured, unhurried. Juniper's eyes were dry and heavy when she looked up and saw him. A man alone on a bay gelding, gray in his beard and sun in his eyes. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a faded duster. His name was Cole Matthews, though she didn't know it yet. He pulled the horse to a stop and stared down at her. "You lost?" he asked, voice low and gravelly. She shook her head slowly. "Left." He looked her over, the useless legs, the hollow cheeks, the bread beside her, untouched. "You got people?" "No more." He dismounted without another word and crouched beside her. "You hungry?" She nodded. He handed her jerky from his saddlebag, then water, then sat beside her and said nothing. After a long moment, she whispered, "Ain't you gonna leave too?" Cole didn't look at her. He just pulled out a small carving knife and a piece of wood, began to whittle. "No," he said. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Because someone already did, and one is more than enough." The morning sun rose soft and slow over the horizon, rushing gold across the butte where Juniper had spent the night. She watched Cole Matthews with cautious curiosity as he moved around the small fire he'd made, tending it like a man who'd done it 1,000 times before. He didn't ask questions, didn't lecture, didn't look at her with pity, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. "Where are we going?" Juniper asked as he loaded his gear onto the gelding saddle. "We ain't going far today," he said, tying down his pack. "Got a line shack about 4 miles west. Got a roof, a stove, and canned beans if the mice ain't claimed 'em." He crouched beside her again, his shadow casting long over the sand. "You ride with me." She flinched. "I can't." "You'll sit front. I'll hold you steady." Juniper stared at the horse. It was big, bigger than she remembered horses being. But something in Cole's tone, calm, simple, made her believe she could. And so, with gentle hands and slow movements, he lifted her from the ground, careful not to jostle her legs, and settled her on the saddle in front of him. He didn't grunt, didn't sigh like she was a burden. He just held the reins in one hand and wrapped the other around her middle. "You tell me if it hurts," he said. She didn't answer, but as the horse began to move, and the wind brushed against her face, Juniper felt something she hadn't in months. Motion, not helpless, not dead weight, but moving, living. The shack was small and weather-beaten, tucked against a hill like it was hiding from the world. Cole helped her down and carried her inside without comment, setting her gently on a cot layered with saddle blankets. He didn't ask what happened to her legs, didn't pry about who left her. He only asked, "Can you hold a spoon?" She nodded. "Then you'll eat while I fix the stove." That night, with a fire crackling and stew simmering in an old pot, Juniper watched him work, patching the leaky roof with canvas, sweeping out corners, oiling a broken hinge. He didn't stop moving until the stars rose. "You always fix things?" she asked. He glanced at her. "When they're broke and worth keeping." She blinked, unsure if he meant the shack or her. Before sleep took her, Juniper whispered into the dark, "Why'd you stop for me?" Cole didn't answer at first. Then from the corner where he sat sharpening his blade came his voice. Because when I was 12, someone didn't. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. Cole rose with the sun, built the fire, boiled coffee, and set about fixing things that didn't even need fixing. Juniper watched from the cot by the window, wrapped in the same threadbare shawl, her legs still unmoving, her eyes sharper than ever. She didn't talk much, but she listened. To the creak of Cole's boots on the floorboards, to the wind humming against the shack's crooked eaves, to the way he said things without saying them. She was learning him slowly, and he in turn didn't treat her like glass. "You got hands," he said one afternoon, placing a small tin bowl, a rag, and a dull knife beside her. She blinked. "What's this for?" "Peel potatoes. We can't eat nothing but beans forever." She hesitated, then took the knife. Her fingers were thin, but steady. The first potato rolled away from her grip and hit the floor with a thump. Cole didn't flinch. He just picked it up, brushed it off, and set it back down. Try again. By the third one, she had found her rhythm. By the fifth, she was smiling. The shack was still rough, but Cole made it livable. He rigged a pulley system for her to move from bed to chair, repaired the old rocking chair, even carved small blocks of wood into toys, birds, horses, flowers, and left them by the windowsill without ever mentioning them. One morning, Juniper said softly, "You don't ask me to be useful." Cole looked up from chopping kindling. "You already are." Her voice wavered. "Even with my legs like this?" He stood and walked over, kneeling beside her chair. "You got more spirit in you than half the men I've worked with. That's worth more than walking." She stared at him, heart pounding. No one had ever said that before. No one had ever looked at her and seen anything but broken. Later that night, as Cole read aloud from an old book of frontier stories by lantern light, Juniper listened with her chin resting on her knees. "Were you ever married?" she asked out of nowhere. He paused, then closed the book gently. "Once, long time ago." "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. War came, then silence. Some things don't survive either. Juniper whispered, "Do you ever miss it?" He nodded. "Some nights. Most days I just wonder if I could have done more." "You're doing more now," she said softly. Their eyes met across the lantern light. For the first time she saw something flicker in his. Grief, yes, but also hope. And maybe, just maybe, something beginning again. Spring touched the hills with a soft hand. What had been barren now breathed with color. Wildflowers curling through cracks in the earth, green creeping across the hills like a quiet miracle. And in the little line shack tucked between the hills, life, too, was slowly blooming. Juniper now moved from bed to chair by herself. The pulley system Cole built worked, though the ropes creaked and the chair swayed. She didn't mind. The first time she made the full transfer without help, Cole didn't cheer. He just tipped his hat and said, "Told you you'd do it." She beamed for hours. One afternoon, Cole brought in a crate of seeds. "What are those?" she asked, pulling one packet closer. "Lettuce, tomatoes, squash. Thought maybe we'd stop eating out of cans." Juniper ran her fingers over the crinkled paper. "You think I could help?" He looked at her. "I'd be insulted if you didn't." So he built her a raised garden bed, right near the window where she liked to sit. He shaped the earth, but she sowed the seeds, fingers gentle in the soil, smiling like she'd touched something holy. "You plant something, you gotta believe it'll grow," he told her. She looked up at him. "I think that's the bravest thing I've ever done." On warmer days, they sat outside. Cole would whittle or mend tack, while Juniper read from the frontier book. She didn't stumble over the words as much anymore. Her voice grew stronger. So did her laughter. One golden evening, as the sun painted the sky in fire and lavender, Cole handed her a wrapped bundle. "What's this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Something I traded a saddle blanket for." She unwrapped it slowly. A pair of boots. Soft leather. Small. Sturdy. Fitted with polished brass eyelets and hand-stitched seams. "But I can't." "I know," he said. "They're not for walking. They're for standing tall. And someday maybe you'll want to try." She ran her hands over them. The way he'd said someday, not never, made her chest ache in the best kind of way. That night after she'd fallen asleep, Cole sat near the fire staring at the boots by her bed. He hadn't bought them out of hope she'd walk again. He bought them because everyone deserves to feel like they could, and because he realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. Not even to himself. He wasn't just saving her. She was saving him too. The wind changed that week. It blew warmer, harder, carrying the scent of new grass and far-off thunder. The kind of wind that made animals restless and people remember things they'd tried to forget. Juniper felt it first. She'd grown stronger, her arms firm from pushing her chair, her fingers nimble from tending the garden now budding with stubborn green life. But with strength came thoughts. With peace came space for the past to rise. One evening, as the sun dipped and Cole was still out checking the fence line, she opened the small wooden box he kept on the shelf above the stove. He'd never told her not to. Inside, a single photograph of a woman. Dark hair, kind eyes, holding a baby who couldn't be more than a year old. A yellowed letter, folded in half, sealed with string. A wedding band, dulled with age. She didn't read the letter. She just held it in her lap for a long time, then gently placed it back and closed the lid. When Cole returned, his boots dusty and his hat in hand, she looked at him. "I saw the box." He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I figured you might," he said quietly. "I didn't open the letter." His jaw worked. "Wouldn't have blamed you if you had." Juniper hesitated. She was beautiful. "Her name was Anna," he said. "That was our son." Her breath caught. She'd never heard him speak of a child. "What happened?" He stared into the hearth. "Fever came through in the 3rd year of drought. Took them both within a week. I buried them under the ash tree on the south hill." Juniper felt her eyes sting but said nothing. "I left after that," he went on. "Rode until I didn't know the names of towns anymore. Thought if I didn't plant roots, I couldn't lose anything else." Juniper's voice was small. "And then you found me." He looked at her, and for the first time there was no guarded quiet in his eyes. Just grief, yes, but also gentleness. "You didn't let me stay lost." Later that night, while he sat outside on the porch sharpening his knife beneath the stars, Juniper wheeled herself into her little corner and picked up the boots he'd given her. She ran her thumb along the stitching and whispered, "Maybe it's time to try." And far off, under the ash tree on the hill Cole thought he'd left behind, the wind moved through the leaves as if something there had finally let go. It was Cole who noticed it first. Juniper had begun rising earlier. She wheeled herself across the uneven wooden floor with more control, more purpose. She started asking questions about the ranch, about the creek that ran near the ridge, about how long it would take to ride into town. Her world was expanding, and so was something in her eyes. Hope. One late morning, while Cole repaired the old corral, he heard her call from inside the shack. Not in fear, but something else. "Cole," she said, voice clear but trembling. "I want to try." He dropped the hammer and went to her. She was sitting at the edge of the cot, both hands planted on either side, her legs hanging over the edge. Motionless, but ready. "The boots," she said. He fetched them, kneeling before her like he had so many times. But this time his hands were slower, gentler. He laced the boots over her feet, worn and delicate but determined. "I don't expect to walk," she whispered, "just to stand." "Then let's take it slow," he said, his voice thick. He pulled a chair close in front of her, bracing it. "Hold here, I'll lift you halfway, just lean in." She gritted her teeth, breath sharp, arms trembling, but she pushed. With his steady strength beneath her arms, and her own fierce will bracing her heart, Juniper Lee stood upright for the first time in nearly a year. Her knees buckled slightly. Her hands clenched the chair, but she stood. Tears flooded her eyes. Cole didn't speak. He just looked at her like a man witnessing a miracle. Because he was. Later, when she was back in the chair and breathless with the effort, Cole brought her water and a slice of bread with honey. She ate slowly, staring out the window. Then she said, "I used to think love was something for other girls. The ones with pretty shoes and 2 working legs. But now," he turned to her. "Now?" She met his eyes. "Now I think maybe love is quieter. Maybe it walks in on tired boots and waits at the door until you feel ready to let it in." Cole's throat tightened. "I'm already inside," he said. That night, as the stars spilled across the black velvet sky, Juniper didn't dream of walking again. She dreamed of dancing with Cole, in a field full of wildflowers, even if only in her mind. And when she woke, the warmth beside her wasn't just from the fire. It was from knowing she was finally deeply, truly loved. 3 days after Juniper first stood again, a rider appeared on the trail. Cole spotted him just before noon, a silhouette framed by heat shimmer rising off the prairie. The man didn't come with speed or urgency, but there was something about the way he sat the saddle, upright, too polished, that made Cole straighten from his work and reach instinctively for his rifle. Juniper wheeled out onto the porch as the man rode up and tipped his hat. "Afternoon," the stranger said, his voice smooth. "Name's Walter Finch. I came from Carter Ridge." Cole gave a slow nod, unreadable. "Long ride." "Not so bad when the weather holds." "Heard a girl fitting a certain description had been seen out this way. Thought maybe I'd check for myself." Juniper froze. Finch's eyes shifted to her. "You're Juniper Lee, ain't you?" She swallowed. "I used to be. They invited him to sit under the awning. Cole offered coffee but kept his hand near the rifle on the bench behind him. Finch took a sip, then looked straight at Juniper. Your family sent me. My family left me, she said. He hesitated. Word back in Carter Ridge is you vanished. There's a cousin stirring things up, saying there's land tied up in your mother's name that should have passed to them. But now that you're alive, Juniper's fingers tightened on the arms of her chair. They want to use me for a claim. They want to know if you're alive. And if so, who's got control of you? Cole stood. She ain't property. I didn't say she was, Finch said, rising too, though slower. But I'm saying there are folks with papers and interests, and if she ends up showing up in court, she might need protection, might need a lawyer, or... She's got me, Cole cut in, voice sharp as flint. Juniper turned to him, and in that moment, she saw it. Not just a man who had rescued her, but one who would defend her, name her, stand in front of her if the whole world came knocking. When Finch finally left, kicking up dust on the trail, silence fell over the ranch. Juniper sat staring at her unmoving feet for a long while before saying, They never came looking before. Not once, Cole answered softly. Now you matter to them, because you've got something they want. She looked up. But to you? He walked to her slowly, knelt down, and rested his calloused hand over hers. To me, Juniper, you mattered the second I saw you sitting by that stump. You didn't have anything, and I still would have carried you home. Her lips trembled. And now? I wouldn't just carry you, he whispered. I'd choose you. That night, the stars returned. But this time, Juniper didn't just feel loved. She felt claimed. She felt safe. And in the darkness, for the first time, she whispered the words, I love you, Cole Matthews. And from his cot across the room came the quiet reply, I love you back. By the end of the week, word had spread. A letter arrived, torn, dusty, stamped from Carter Ridge. Juniper held it in shaking hands while Cole read it aloud by lamplight. As next of kin, we demand Juniper Lee present herself to settle the dispute regarding the Lee property. Should she refuse, it will be taken as abandonment of claim. Court date set 2 weeks hence. It wasn't just about land, it was about power, and Juniper knew it. They didn't want me when I couldn't walk, she said, her voice bitter with a pain she rarely showed. Now that there's something to take, I'm suddenly valuable again. Cole folded the letter slowly. We can fight this. Do I even want it? She whispered. For 2 days, she didn't speak of it again. She returned to the garden, to the books, to standing, one careful moment at a time. But her mind was far. Cole watched. Then one evening, he brought out a second chair and set it beside her on the porch. Let's say it's not about them, he said. Let's say it's about you. About making sure the girl they threw away has the right to stand. On her own land, with her own name. Juniper blinked, heart aching. What if I fall, Cole? You already did, he said. And look where you are now. The next morning, Cole saddled the horse and fashioned a special sling across the front saddle to hold her upright and steady. She hadn't ridden like that since the day he first carried her from the stump. Now she mounted herself, arms shaking but eyes determined. They rode for Carter Ridge just before dawn. The town hadn't changed. Same courthouse with peeling paint. Same people who looked twice, not because they cared, but because they remembered her. Juniper sat straight in the old wooden courtroom, boots polished, dress clean. She wore her weakness like armor. Cole stood beside her, silent, steady. Her cousin, a slick man with a curled mustache and a lawyer's tongue, made his case first. Miss Lee forfeited any right to the property when she disappeared from the family home and could no longer contribute. We acted in the family's best interest. Cole whispered, Not a word about you. About what they did. She nodded. When it was her turn, she rolled forward, each inch of distance hard-earned. Her voice didn't tremble. I didn't vanish. I was left. They dropped me on the edge of nowhere, with a blanket and a stale piece of bread. And I lived. I built something. So no, I won't hand over the land to the ones who buried me alive. The judge watched her carefully. The room was still. She finished. You don't get to abandon someone and come back just to take what grew from their survival. They won. The property remained in her name. The cousin stormed out. Cole didn't smile. He only touched her shoulder and said, You did that. That night, back at the shack, Juniper wheeled to the edge of the porch and looked out over the land. Do you think I deserve to keep it? She asked. Cole stepped behind her and placed a small folded deed in her hands. Because it's not just land anymore, he said. It's the ground where you stood up for yourself. That makes it worth more than any paper. And as the moon lit the grass and the wind moved through the wheat, Juniper realized she hadn't just won, she had claimed her life. A week after they returned from Carter Ridge, Cole noticed something had changed in Juniper's eyes. It wasn't fire. She'd always had that. It was stillness. The kind that came only when a person finally stopped running, from pain, from memory, from themselves. She moved around the cabin like it was hers now. Not a shelter, not a temporary stop, but home. She gardened in the mornings, read in the afternoons, and rolled her chair out to the porch each sunset without fail. Cole found himself looking at her longer than he should, listening to her voice even when she wasn't speaking, remembering the exact moment he stopped seeing a girl and started seeing a woman he couldn't imagine life without. And he knew he was done waiting. He spent the day working with purpose, carving something out of cedar behind the barn. Juniper didn't ask. She only watched with quiet curiosity from her window, noting how he kept his hands close to the blade, how serious his expression had become. By evening, he came inside, dusted off his shirt, and brought out a small wooden box. No polish, no lock, just honest, well-sanded wood. He set it on her lap. She opened it slowly and gasped. Inside was a ring, not store-bought, not gold, handcrafted silver with a tiny heart etched into the band, and around it, 3 words carved so delicately she almost missed them. Still worthy, always. She looked up at him, tears threatening. Juniper Lee, he said, his voice rough but steady. I don't need a preacher or a paper. I don't even need to hear you say yes. I just need you to know. If you'll have me, I'm yours. And if not, I'll still sit beside you until the end of my days. She didn't cry. She set the box aside, reached for his hand and said, You carried me when I couldn't move. You listened when I didn't speak. You planted roots in a girl the world gave up on. She pulled herself up by the edge of the table, legs still weak, still trembling, but she stood. I won't just say yes, Cole Matthews. I'll walk toward it. He caught her before she fell, held her like a prayer, and kissed her like the answer. Not to the question he'd asked, but to every wound that came before it. They didn't marry in a church. There was no preacher, no lace veil, no music from a piano. Just a porch swept clean, the sun warm over the hills, and a borrowed ribbon braided through Juniper's hair. Grace, as they named it. Cole stood tall in his cleanest shirt, a hand-carved ring tucked in his vest pocket. Juniper wore a dress she'd sewn herself over the winter. Simple, pale blue, soft enough to breathe in. The sky above them was big and bright, and the garden beside the house bloomed early that year, almost like it was waiting for this day. I never thought I'd walk down any kind of aisle, Juniper said, gripping the rail as she pushed her chair forward. You're not walking, Cole said with a smile, stepping off the porch to meet her halfway. You're arriving, like you always do, on your own terms. They made their vows under the ash tree on the South Hill, the same one where Cole had once buried grief. Now it stood tall over something new. He promised to never carry her without asking. She promised to never let her heart shrink small again. They didn't need a witness, just the wind, and the earth, and 2 stubborn, beautiful lives that had decided to grow toward each other, like wildflowers cracking through stone. That summer, Cole built her a proper house, not just a line shack with patchwork repairs, but a home. Wide doorways, smooth floors, 2 chairs on the porch, one rocking, one rolling. He carved her name into the beam above the hearth, and when she saw it, she cried for the first time in months. I don't deserve all this, she whispered. Yes, you do, he said, lifting her chin. And more. In the autumn, they planted trees. One for her, one for him, one for the children they hadn't yet had, but already hoped for. And when winter came again, Juniper stood one last time at the edge of the field, boots on, hand in Cole's, strong as ever. She didn't walk far. She didn't need to. She had already come the greatest distance of all, from abandoned to chosen. 3 years had passed. The house with 2 chairs now stood tall at the heart of a small patch of green carved into the prairie. The trees they planted had grown just past their waists, their roots deep and strong, much like the lives that now bloomed around them. Juniper sat by the window one morning, holding a steaming mug of coffee and watching the sun rise through lace curtains she'd sewn herself. A pair of small boots sat by the door, too small to be hers, and too muddy to belong anywhere but here. Calvin, she called gently. A blur of laughter and dark hair dashed past the garden fence. The boy was 5 now, spirited, fast, loud, and endlessly curious. He wasn't born of her body, but he had Cole's steadiness and Juniper's fire. They'd taken him in when he was barely 2, found wandering with no shoes and no name. They gave him both. Cole returned from the pasture as the wind picked up dust from the west. "There's a wagon," he said, brushing off his coat, "coming down the old trail. Looks official." Juniper's jaw tensed slightly. They hadn't had visitors in months. An hour later, the wagon arrived. A woman stepped down, hat tilted, boots polished, and letters in her hand. She was from the State Registry of Orphaned Children. "We've heard of you," she said, smiling kindly. "Of your story. Of how you took in Calvin. We were wondering, would you consider fostering more?" Juniper's fingers tightened on the wheels of her chair. "I'm not sure we're qualified," she said. "You're more than qualified," the woman replied. "You're what they don't have anywhere else. Steady hands. A quiet house. A chance." That night, Cole said nothing when she handed him the letter. He just kissed her cheek and whispered, "You always did know how to grow things." And so they opened their home again. To a girl with fire-burned scars who didn't speak for weeks. To a boy who slept under the porch for days before coming inside. To a set of twins who only trusted Juniper because she rolled low and never raised her voice. And in time, the ranch became more than a place of healing. It became a refuge. A place where no child was ever left by a stump again. She arrived just after the first frost, silent as smoke, her eyes too old for her small face. Barely 6, thin as a rail, she clutched a rag doll with no eyes sewn on and refused to speak. The man who brought her, an exhausted deputy from a neighboring county, explained little, only that she'd been found alone near a burned wagon 2 towns over. No bodies, no letters, no name until she'd whispered it once to a nurse. "Do you want to stay here, sweetheart?" Juniper had asked gently as Cole stood behind her, watching with quiet concern. Maribel didn't answer, but she didn't run either. The days passed, and the girl kept to the corners, silent, watchful. She ate in small bites, folded her bedding perfectly each morning, and never cried. Not once, not even in sleep. "She's not holding back," Juniper whispered one evening to Cole on the porch. "I think there's just nothing left in her to let go." Cole looked toward the barn where Maribel sat alone, tracing shapes in the dust. "She needs time," he said. "She's surviving, just like you once did." Juniper squeezed his hand. "Then we'll give her all the time she needs." One morning, Juniper wheeled into the kitchen and found the rag doll on the floor, threadbare and face down. She picked it up, smoothed the fabric, then, without a word, she brought out her sewing kit. By sunset, the doll had 2 mismatched button eyes, a soft smile stitched carefully into place, and a patchwork dress cut from Juniper's own wedding scraps. She left it on Maribel's pillow. Didn't say a word. The next night, the doll was gone from the bed, and in its place, a small drawing on folded paper. 2 stick figures, one in a rocking chair, one in a wheelchair. Hand in hand. That winter, Maribel began to speak. Only a few words, only to Juniper, but enough. Enough to say, "I like honey toast." Enough to ask, "Can I plant seeds too?" Enough to whisper, "Do people stay here?" And when Juniper looked her in the eyes and said, "Yes, always," the girl climbed into her lap and wrapped her arms around her, trembling, tight, and cried for the first time. Later, as the fire crackled and the wind howled gently outside, Cole placed a quiet kiss on Juniper's head. "You gave her tears back," he murmured. Juniper smiled into his chest. "No, I just held the space. She did the rest." In that moment, their home wasn't just a safe place anymore. It had become a beginning. Not just for broken children, but for a woman who once thought she'd never be more than what she'd lost. And for the man who once thought love would never find him again. The letter arrived on a windy afternoon in early spring. It came tucked in the hands of a traveling school teacher passing through from Kansas, addressed simply to Juniper Lee Matthews, Ward Ranch, North Prairie. Juniper hadn't seen handwriting that neat in years. She opened it carefully, her hands unusually still. The parchment was official, the kind that crackled when unfolded and carried the scent of ink in cities. Cole stood at her shoulder, quiet, steady as always. Her eyes scanned the top, State Department of Civil Affairs, Public Accounts and Testimonies Unit. Cole raised an eyebrow. "You in trouble?" She gave a tiny shake of the head. "No, I think it's something else." Then she began to read aloud. "Mrs. Matthews, we recently came across several witness accounts recorded by Carter Ridge residents, as well as testimony from a recent circuit judge who handled your land dispute. We're reaching out with both admiration and request. The State Women's Council is assembling a series of public letters and oral recordings under the banner, Voices That Endured. We'd be honored to include your story. If you're willing, we'd like to send an official scribe to your homestead to conduct a private interview. We understand mobility is a consideration. We come at your convenience with no obligation. Please consider sharing what you've overcome. There are girls, now and yet to come, who need to know what a woman can survive and what she can build. With deep respect, Monsieur Kelly, historian and archivist. Juniper sat in silence for a long moment. Then, they want my story. Cole pulled out a chair, sat slowly. What are you thinking? I spent years hiding, she said. I thought if people knew the truth, they'd pity me, or worse, use me like before. He looked at her gently. And now? Now, she said softly. I think they need to hear it. Not just the bad parts, but the after. The growing, the loving, the soil under your nails kind of healing. He reached for her hand and gave it a firm, quiet squeeze. Then tell them. A month later, a young woman arrived in a long coat with an inkwell, notebooks, and wide, listening eyes. She sat with Juniper on the porch for 3 days straight. No rush, no cameras, just sunlight, wind, and words. Juniper told her everything. From the moment they left her at the stump, to the man on horseback with a voice like gravel, to the first time she stood, the first time she loved, to the children who had no one, but found home anyway. And on the last evening, the young woman asked, if you could leave just one sentence in the record, something they'll read 100 years from now, what would it be? Juniper looked toward the hills, then to the house with 2 chairs, then to Cole, her constant miracle. And she said, you are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become after. It was nearing summer when they found him. Cole had ridden out before dawn to check the far fence line. Juniper was in the garden with little Maribel, thinning sprouts of carrot greens, when she heard the dog barking, not excited, but low and urgent. Copper never barked that way unless something was wrong. She wheeled around the side of the house just in time to see the shed door swing open, and there he was, a boy, no more than 10. Dirt-smudged face, sunken cheeks, hair too long and eyes far too old. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just stared at her like he was bracing for punishment. Juniper didn't move closer. She knew that look. She'd worn it once, too. They fed him slowly. Bread dipped in broth. Warm water with honey. No questions. Not yet. Cole returned midday and didn't say a word when he saw the boy asleep on a folded quilt near the hearth. Juniper only shook her head. We'll ask later. It took him 3 days to speak. My name's Eli, he said quietly, eyes on the floor. Juniper's breath caught. Cole looked up from his chair across the room. That's a good name, he said. Solid. Eli said nothing else for hours. That night, Juniper sat beside him and waited. She didn't press. She simply handed him her old rag doll with the mismatched eyes. Maribel had long since outgrown it. He held it with confusion at first, then too tightly like it was a lifeline. Later, in a whisper so soft it barely escaped the walls, he said, I was hiding from the man who hit me. Juniper closed her eyes. So it had begun again. The cycle she knew too well. They made room for him. Cole added another cot. Juniper adjusted his food slowly, and Maribel, older now and protective, watched over him like a hawk. But he didn't sleep well. And when he did, he thrashed. One night he screamed. Juniper wheeled to his bedside and took his hand. Not gripping, just resting. You're safe here, she said softly. You can break things here, you can cry, but no one will ever leave you behind again. Eli opened his eyes, tears streaking silently. Promise? She nodded. Promise. Later, when Cole asked if she thought they were ready to take in another child, after everything, after all the others, Juniper didn't hesitate. We don't choose when they come, she said. We only choose how wide we open the door. And so they did. Again, and again, and again. And with every child, the ranch didn't get heavier. It grew lighter, because with every soul they healed themselves a little more too. The morning began like any other. Bright, calm, with bird song weaving through the open windows and the scent of fresh bread cooling on the sill. The children were scattered across the ranch, Maribel feeding the hens, Eli carving sticks with Cole behind the barn, and Juniper inside, folding laundry with soft, practiced hands. Then came the snap. A sudden crack from the porch, a child's voice yelling, then silence. Juniper turned toward the sound instinctively, heart rising to her throat. One wheel of her chair caught the lip of the doorframe as she rushed forward. And then she tipped. It happened fast, but the landing was hard. Her elbow struck the floor, her head knocked the threshold, and the air rushed from her lungs. For a moment all was still. Then the pain bloomed, sharp, deep, paralyzing. She lay on the porch, staring up at the sky as the wind brushed her face, and for the first time in years, She felt something close to fear again, not for herself, but for what it would mean if she couldn't move. Cole got to her first. He knelt, arms gentle but firm, voice calm though his hands trembled. The children crowded nearby, silent and scared. "Don't try to lift me yet," she said. "Something's not right." They did what they could. A blanket beneath her, water to her lips. Cole riding out to fetch Doc Harlan from the ridge town. Hours passed in worry. Juniper stayed conscious, her jaw clenched against the pain, her eyes never leaving the frightened faces of the kids. Especially Eli, who stood with his fists balled at his sides, as if trying to will her back into safety. The doctor came at sundown. Diagnosis: a fractured shoulder, bruised ribs. Not life-threatening, but a slow, painful recovery ahead. And more importantly, complete rest. "You'll need weeks, maybe months," the doctor said. "No lifting, no strain, no work." Juniper's breath hitched, not from pain but from helplessness. "I've got mouths to feed," she murmured. "You've also got a husband," Cole said, stepping forward. "And kids who'd do anything to carry the weight for you." She looked around at them. Maribel holding her tray of tea, Eli trying to sew with crooked fingers, even the smallest children watching with wide, determined eyes. In the weeks that followed, Juniper did what she'd once feared most. She let go. She let them help her bathe. Let Cole do the planting. Let Maribel brush her hair. Let Eli learn to knead dough, even if the first loaf was hard as brick. And little by little, something beautiful unfolded. She saw herself not as the foundation of the home, but as the seed. And they, the people she'd once rescued, had become the roots, holding her up now so she could rest, so she could heal, so she could simply be. One night, as she lay under the quilts, arm bound in a sling, Cole stroked her forehead gently and whispered, "You always thought you were the one holding everyone else together. But maybe, just maybe, we were always holding each other." Juniper blinked back tears. "I've never felt more loved than when I couldn't do a thing for anyone." "That," he said, "is exactly when love speaks the loudest." It was a soft morning in late May when Juniper wheeled herself to the edge of the porch and stared out over the fields. The ryegrass had grown tall again. The wind brushed through it like hands over silk, and the children were already out. Maribel with her new book in the hammock, Eli helping Cole fix the fence where the boards had warped after the last rain. Laughter floated on the breeze. Juniper closed her eyes and breathed it in. She'd been off her feet, so to speak, for nearly 2 months. Her shoulder, once swollen and dark, had healed. Her ribs ached only faintly. The doctor had visited last week and declared her free to start moving again, but slowly. "Take your time," he'd said. "You've already done the hard part." But Juniper knew better. Sometimes the hardest part was starting again. Inside the house, the cane sat by the door. She had kept it all these years, though she hadn't used it in nearly a decade, not since she'd taught herself to move from the chair to the bed on her own, and from there to the garden paths with Cole's quiet help. But the cane had been the very first symbol of trying. She picked it up, felt its worn wood in her palm, and slowly, achingly, Juniper rose. Her first steps weren't graceful. Her legs trembled, her shoulder tensed, her knees protested. But she moved. Out the door, onto the porch, and then onto the soft dirt path that led to the fence line. Cole turned just in time to see her. He dropped the hammer in his hand, eyes wide, disbelief melting into something like reverence. Eli followed his gaze, and his mouth dropped open. Juniper standing, walking. No one spoke. Not because it was a miracle, but because it felt like something sacred. A return, a quiet triumph, a reminder that healing isn't always loud, but it is always worth waiting for. That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was bathed in moonlight, Juniper and Cole sat in rocking chairs side by side. "I didn't know if I'd ever do that again," she whispered. "You did," Cole said simply. She looked at him. "How can you be so sure?" He turned to her with a half smile. "Because I've known you longer than you've known you." They sat like that until the stars spilled thick across the prairie sky. No need to fill the silence, because sometimes love sounds like footsteps in dust, and sometimes it looks like the smallest step, taken by someone who swore they never would again. A month passed after Juniper's first steps. Summer had warmed the earth, and life at the ranch had settled into its new rhythm. Cole's quiet strength, the children's laughter in the fields, and Juniper's presence. Lighter now, but no less steady. Then, one morning, a rider arrived from town. A young boy, barely older than Eli, clutching a folded envelope in one hand and breathlessly asking, "Are you Miss Juniper Matthews?" She nodded, curious. He handed her the note and rode off as fast as he'd come. The envelope bore the seal of Dry Hollow Township Hall. Cole stood beside her as she unfolded it and read aloud, "Dear Mrs. Matthews, we recently learned through a traveling teacher, and word passed between distant towns of your extraordinary story and the children you've welcomed to your home. We believe the women and families of Dry Hollow and beyond could draw strength and hope from hearing you speak. We are organizing a community gathering this fall titled Stories of Endurance When the Prairie Fought Back. It would be our great honor if you would attend as our keynote guest. You need not stand, you need only speak. With deep admiration, Eleanor Hartley, Chairwoman, Dry Hollow Women's Council. Juniper read the letter twice more before folding it. Then she laughed, soft, breathless. Me? Speaking in front of strangers? You already speak to strangers, Cole said gently. Every child who walks through our gate. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what I'd even say. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Maybe you just tell them how you got here, and let them decide what it means. For days she mulled it over. She sat in her old chair by the window, watching the sunset spill gold over the hills, remembering the first night she arrived at this ranch, broken and silent. She thought of Maribel's tears, Eli's trembling hands, the look in Cole's eyes when he said, "You did." Finally, one evening she wrote back, just one line, "I will come, I will speak, I will carry the weight because so many others still cannot." When the letter was sent, Cole asked if she was nervous. "No," she said, "because for once I'm not telling the story to survive it. I'm telling it because we did." And with that, the preparations began, not just for a speech, but for a legacy. One born not from perfection, but from pain, resilience, and love that refused to vanish when things got hard. The sky was silver with autumn light when Juniper arrived at Dry Hollow. Cole drove the wagon slowly, the old mare clopping along the worn dirt road as golden leaves danced around the wheels. In the back sat Juniper, dressed in her simplest navy dress, the one she wore on Sundays, and when she planted seeds in remembrance. Her cane rested beside her, though today she wasn't sure she'd need it. Beside her lay a folded page, just one, written in her hand. Dry Hollow's town hall was an aging wooden structure with a porch that creaked and windows clouded by time. But that day, it held something sacred. A full room, dozens of faces, women, men, children, all turned when Juniper entered. Some recognized her, some didn't. But every person rose to their feet when she crossed the threshold, guided slowly by Cole and her cane. No music, no clapping, just silence, the kind carved by reverence. On the makeshift stage stood a single chair. Juniper sat. The chairwoman approached the podium, her voice steady. Today, we hear not from someone who studied hardship, but someone who lived it, and who still lives. Beautifully. She stepped aside, and Juniper, timidly at first, leaned toward the microphone. I never thought I'd be speaking here, she began, her voice soft but unwavering. There was a time I didn't speak at all. Murmurs stilled. I was left behind because I couldn't walk, because I was inconvenient, because they didn't see value in someone broken. Eyes widened, heads bowed. I found a man on a ranch who didn't just rescue me. He waited for me to rescue myself. Her gaze swept the crowd. And I did. We did. Not just for me, but for every child who came after. Starving, bruised, angry, ashamed. We took them in, and they rebuilt us as much as we rebuilt them. Juniper paused, then lifted her single page. This is what I came to say. She unfolded the paper. And read, to the woman sitting alone right now, convinced she's too damaged to matter. To the boy hiding from a world that taught him fear before it taught him kindness. To the soul that was told to stay quiet, to be small, to apologize for existing. You are not the pain done to you. You are the love that survives in spite of it. When she finished, the hall didn't erupt into applause. It didn't need to. Instead, people stood, hands clutched at hearts. Tears slipped freely. One woman, then another, and another approached. They hugged her, whispered thanks, asked to tell their own stories, asked how they too could help someone the world had left behind. And somewhere in that sea of strangers, Juniper saw it. The spark, that tiny flicker of hope she thought she'd only light on her ranch, now spreading, passed from hand to heart to home. That night, back on the wagon, Cole asked, "Was it everything you hoped?" Juniper leaned against his shoulder and whispered, "It was more. I didn't just tell a story. I gave others permission to live theirs." It was early winter when he arrived. The wind howled that morning, stirring up dust and the scent of distant pine. Cole had just returned from chopping wood. Maribel was indoors, stitching a patch onto Eli's old jacket, and Juniper, wrapped in her thickest shawl, was enjoying a quiet moment with a mug of cinnamon tea by the porch rail, until Copper barked, low, uncertain. The kind of bark that said, "Someone's here, but I don't know if we trust them yet." A tall figure stood at the gate, wrapped in a threadbare coat, hat pulled low, satchel slung across one shoulder, worn and frayed at the edges. His boots were cracked, his breath visible in the cold, and he didn't move until Cole approached slowly from the barn with cautious eyes. "Can I help you?" Cole asked. The man looked up. "I'm looking for Juniper Matthews." Cole stiffened slightly, then glanced toward the porch. Juniper was already there, watching, a frown tugging at her brow. She wheeled herself closer as Cole stepped aside. The man removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you probably don't remember me." Juniper studied his face. It was older, weathered, but something about the eyes, brown, restless, haunted, pulled at a memory long buried. She squinted. "We've met?" He nodded. "In the orphanage. You were 13. I was 15. You used to sit by the window with your back to everyone." Her breath caught. "Peter?" she whispered. He gave a small, hesitant smile. "That's me, or it was." They sat at the kitchen table as the fire crackled, the children hovering quietly nearby, sensing something important unfolding. Peter sipped the hot broth Maribel had offered. His hands trembled. "I heard your name from a woman in Dry Hollow," he began. "She said you spoke at some gathering, told the story of how you were left behind." Juniper's eyes softened, distant. "I did," he nodded slowly. "I was one of the boys who watched. Back then, when your legs stopped working. I didn't say anything. I didn't help. I didn't even say goodbye when they sent you off." Juniper looked down. "You were just a kid, too?" He swallowed hard. "I know, but I carried that guilt like a chain." Silence filled the room. Then softly he said, "I don't have a family. Not anymore. I've been drifting. For years. But when I heard your name, I thought, maybe it's time I stop running." He looked at her. "Would you let me stay? Help out? I don't want to take anything. I just want to belong somewhere." Juniper's throat tightened. She glanced at Cole, who was watching quietly. Then she turned back to Peter. "You don't have to earn a place here," she said gently. "Just be willing to heal." He blinked, stunned, then whispered, "I don't even know what that means." Juniper smiled. "It means you're ready." Later that night, Peter sat by the hearth, Eli showing him how to whittle. Maribel braided thread nearby, and Juniper watched them all, realizing that the story she thought had ended at town hall was only just beginning. Spring returned soft and gold. The air smelled of wildflowers again, and the ranch bloomed not just in color, but in life. The children had grown. Peter, now stronger, surer, had become a steady hand on the fences, a kind heart in the kitchen, and a quiet voice of comfort on long nights. Even the land seemed to recognize its own healing. But something else had begun to bloom, too. A question, one whispered first by Eli, then repeated in giggles by the youngest kids, and finally murmured one morning by Maribel as she helped Juniper into her shawl. "Miss Juniper, why don't you and Mr. Cole ever get married?" Juniper had laughed. But later, when she sat by the fire beside Cole, her hand in his, she asked it out loud. "I know we never made it official," she said softly. "But would you want to?" Cole looked at her, eyes filled with something so deep it made her breath still. "I married you in my heart the day you touched that porch," he whispered. "But I'd be proud to say it out loud, too." The wedding was simple. A few neighbors, a pastor from the next town over, the children in hand-sewn outfits, wildflowers woven into their hair. Juniper wore a dress Maribel had helped stitch, loose sleeves, soft blue fabric, and a tiny embroidered vine across the hem, like the ones growing by the fence line. Cole wore his cleanest shirt, boots freshly oiled, and a smile that didn't leave his face once. They were wed under the oak tree behind the barn, where the light fell through the branches like blessings. And when the vows were spoken, the wind hushed, as if nature itself paused to listen. After the cake was eaten and the guests rode home, Juniper and Cole sat by the fire as the stars blinked awake above them. Juniper leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to wonder," she said, "if anything beautiful could grow from something so broken." "And?" Cole asked gently. She smiled. "I was wrong. Everything beautiful comes from broken ground. That's how you plant a seed." In the years that followed, the ranch became more than a home. It became a haven. Children continued to arrive, lost, hurt, afraid. But they left stronger, kinder, whole. And Juniper, once the girl abandoned at 12, became the woman others sought out. To learn, to rest, to believe again. She never chased fame, never published a book, though many begged her to. But she wrote letters, to girls in towns she'd never seen, to mothers on the edge of giving up, to boys ashamed of their softness. And each letter ended the same. You matter. You are not too late, and you are not alone. One winter, long after the youngest had grown and started lives of their own, a visitor returned to the ranch. A teenager, now tall with bright eyes and a notebook in her hand. She sat with Juniper and asked, "What do you want the world to remember you for?" Juniper smiled, her silver hair glowing in the firelight, "For keeping the light on, just long enough for someone else to find their way home."